I'm Anne McElroy, and welcome to today's panel discussion on the impact of the pandemic on women in the workplace. And joining me today are a group of women who know a lot about this subject. I'm going to introduce them briefly. I'll just tell you quickly, I'm a columnist with the Evening Standard and senior editor at The Economist. My job in the next half hour or so is really to direct the traffic. The stars are coming up, and they are Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow, who often speaks on issues affecting women in the Commons. Hi there, Stella. Asma Shah is CEO of You Make It, which is an East London-based charity providing empowerment training and career support for young Black and Asian women. Hi there, Asma. Anna Whitehouse, otherwise known as Mother Pucker, is a flexible working campaigner, author and broadcaster. And Kike Onewinde is founder of BYP Network, which connects Black professionals with each other and with companies to further their ambitions. The background to this, as we all know, is the year of the pandemic, and the statistics are not so great for women in the capital and beyond. They do appear to have been disproportionately affected by what's happened, more likely than men to lose their jobs, to be furloughed, and also working in sectors like healthcare that are vulnerable to COVID-induced instability. The death rate for Black, Asian and minority ethnic women is around twice as high as it is for white men. We're still looking into the causes and correlations of that. But what I'd like to get from all of you is a sense of where you think women are as we, at this point, hopefully emerge from the pandemic. What has happened and what do we need more of? Asma, I thought I might start with you because you're at the cutting edge of this with the women that you support. What are you seeing and hearing, and what are you focusing on?
So the women that we work with prior to joining us, already pre the pandemic, suffer from aloneness, a lack of self-confidence, a lack of networks and experience to really forge ahead with their careers. And obviously, we also work with women who are in domestic violence situations, are not very safe and have been locked into their homes during what's been probably one of the craziest plus years that I've witnessed as an adult. So what we do through the work at You Make It is we encourage relationships between women and us, if albeit remotely through Zoom. We work on their mental health, which involves them having access to one-to-one therapy, pastoral care that helps them practically with what it is to be a poor Black and Asian woman in London, which is of course fantastically diverse, but is also a very divided city. And we also give very practical skills and support around helping them set up their own businesses, but also forge ahead with employment. So for us, it's about looking at where women are at in a very holistic way, looking at their health and wellness as much as it is about giving them the tools to practically forge ahead and earn a living. And just to your point, a lot of the women that we work with, Black and Asian, typically are in lower paid work when we find them. And many of them work in events or catering. And obviously those sectors, as a result of the pandemic, have really taken a battering. So it's really important our women are able to understand in a very creative way what their potential is, even within the context of COVID.
Stella Creasy, there was a letter signed not long ago by 60 business leaders in London, including maybe female business leaders, including Dame Helena Morrissey, pointing out that this was in danger of turning back the clock on women's rights, something you've been very active in all your political career. Is she right? To what extent is this simply something that will cure itself as we hopefully all get our vaccinations and head out back there and the economy recovers? And if it isn't as simple as that, what do we need to do more of?
Yeah, I think we have to recognise that you ask about where we're at now. We are further backwards than we were before. I mean, it wasn't an equal society before the pandemic happened, but what the pandemic has done is to magnify those inequalities. So actually, when you look at the data, it's mums in particular who've been furloughed or been made redundant. We always knew that pregnant women were at risk of redundancy. Thousands more of them have been made redundant during the pandemic. And then you layer on top of that other intersectional issues about race and social class, and you realise that women have really had it stopped to them. Because actually what's happened over the last year is we haven't had this conversation. There was just this assumption that, if you closed all the schools, the mums could do the homeschooling and keep their jobs and keep the households ticking over. And that, what they needed was a pat on the back from the the Chancellor and the Prime Minister about what jolly good sports they were. The reality is, in October, when the end of furloughing comes, I am desperately worried, especially in the capital, especially in the industries where there tended to be a lot of women working anyway, as we were saying about catering, hospitality, retail. There's going to be a hell of a lot of women who cannot go back to work because there will be no childcare sector in this country. The TUC research tells us that 70% of women who've wanted to go back to work during the pandemic haven't been able to do so because of a lack of childcare. We're seeing nurseries across the capital closing because they're in a complete financial meltdown. But I have to say, when you talk about these issues at a national level, sometimes it feels like you're talking Klingon, as in literally you said the word woman and beyond that they have no idea what you're talking about. It's bad for our economy. It's also bad for families because it means that people will have fewer choices about how to organise themselves to be able to make it work. And that includes dads as well. But this hasn't been seen as a national priority to date, and it really does need to be.
Anna Whitehouse, you've been campaigning for flexible working and more flexible working rights for many years. I suppose we could say we've almost got like the flexibility has been rather imposed at the moment, hasn't it? You know, we're working from different places on this call, elsewhere. I'm not giving away many trade secrets. I think you're actually sitting on a beanbag somewhere in your house and doing your job. You know, it's like, she's like, damn. You weren't going to say that, were you? But you know, we've all been there. You know, someone's got baby in the background. There's all sorts going on around us. But that's not the same as having rights and a sort of clear pattern of work that you can pursue more flexibly. So how has it affected what you're campaigning for?
Yeah, so I think there was a meme going around in lockdown one about Sir Isaac Newton, how he came up with a theory of calculus in the bubonic plague in 1665. And I was like, good for him. But he didn't have a child hollering for a sort of Peppa Pig spoon over a Paw Patrol spoon by his side. And I think that there was this huge assumption that seemingly overnight, as we went into lockdown one, that suddenly, you know, the floodgates to flexibility opened and we released the shackles of the 9 to 5 to some extent. And lots of companies were sort of patting themselves on the back immediately as to saying, well, you know, we're working flexibly now. And they weren't. I think we did a report with Sir Robert McAlpine called Flex Forever, Flexible Working Beyond a Crisis. And the biggest issue we have seen has been fake flex, companies thinking that working from home in a pandemic is effective flexible working, which is just not the case at all. So I think really the bigger issue, the sort of movement from flex appeal within the three lockdowns has been overproductivity. Burning out has been the burden of not just childcare, but all unpaid labour being on female shoulders. We know that, yes, mothers were impacted hugely. 47% of mothers logged off essentially from their careers compared to fathers in lockdown. But more generally, women were 1.8 times more likely to lose their jobs in the pandemic. So I suppose where we sort of sit is, my frustration is that we knew this was going to happen, that women were going to be disproportionately impacted. You know, you look at SARS, you look to Ebola, we knew this was going to happen. And why were we not more prepared? And why are we currently sitting here questioning why we're in a Margaret Atwood novel almost? You look at the SAGE meetings from the last 73 meetings, and you know, gender was really only mentioned in relation to men, how many men were dying, how men were the ones sort of breaking lockdown over women, but gender equality wasn't there.
Kike, your platform is for Black, Asian, ethnic minority women hit harder by the pandemic than white women. The statistics tell their own story there. So how have you changed what you're doing on the platform, and what kind of support do you find now is more sought after than it was before?
Yeah, great question. So BYP Network is predominantly for Black professionals, men and women, but we do have mainly women on the platform. But what we found, especially at the start of the pandemic, was a lot of them got let go or furloughed. And it was this kind of beginning period of, oh my God, I didn't expect this. You know, maybe I was planning for a home, or I had savings, or I had ideas of, you know, holiday, just all these grand ideas that obviously just all went out the window for everybody in this pandemic. But essentially what we had to do at BIP was just change everything to just upskilling and well-being and, all about the economy, and just give them as much information as possible. And pretty much every single week we have 1 or 2 webinars on, jobs or business. We did grants, for example, for Black business owners. So I'm predominantly in the startup world, and, statistic wise, we don't really get funding as Black founders or Black female founders. It's something like 1% of VC funding goes to us. And something that we found was that, for example, Future Fund is something that the government proposed, but that again didn't go to the Black community or Black female community. As well as a lot of the government funding in general, it's shown that it didn't really go to our community. So we've been impacted not only in terms of the jobs, but even just thinking, okay, how do I start a business and then try and come out of it through that means didn't really happen. So we essentially, like I said, we had grants that we gave out to them. We did an NHS fundraise as well, where we gave out over £30,000 to NHS staff. And what essentially we were trying to do is that we realized that our members and their parents were going out, they were frontline workers because they needed the money, even though, we were seeing that they were dying the most at the time. So this really affected us and our members, because not only are we having to contend with, oh, I've lost my job, oh my God, I'm furloughed. It's also, oh, my parents are maybe cleaners, or, they're doing social work, and they're in a risky position. And my mum, for example, she has, asthma, high blood pressure, DVT, all types of things. And you can imagine for her, she's had to just stay home on her laptop, scared. And then when we look at the vaccine, again, we know that the Black community, BAME community, are quite skeptical about the vaccine. And I feel like for women, there hasn't been enough information, especially for pregnant women, women that are breastfeeding, women that want children, about the effects of getting the vaccine. So we just try and give them as much information as possible. It's a community of over about 50,000 members. So again, it's about them leaning on each other, getting upskill from each other, and just essentially anything that we can do to support them. And we ourselves, we employ over about 20 people or so.
Right. Well, let's start to look into what we're seeing in statistics and what that might show us. In 2021, we're going to see something in the autumn. We're going to get our statistics through again. Do you have any clear sense of what it's going to show?
Well, we've already had some of the statistics through, and it shows that the gap has widened again. And the gap was moving in a glacially slow perspective to begin with. Whatever the critique of how we do gender pay gap reporting, it's more the signal that it sent a year and a half ago that, when things got difficult, don't worry about equality. We have to take equality out of the statistics realm, out of the Department for Education, to a cold, hard economic question. Because actually, if you are an economy that has a really low level of productivity, if you are a country facing something like a pandemic, all the evidence shows us that countries that are more equal are more resilient. So actually, the nations that had not just gender pay gap reporting, but just had more diversity in their leadership and across the piece, have done better. And I think that's quite telling when we talk about what we want to do in repairing after the pandemic, about why this stuff matters. This isn't about special treatment. This is about what works to make your country more capable of coping with a crisis.
I wonder if anyone else might like to come in, just pop yourselves into the conversation and tell us what you're going to be focusing on, because you've all laid out situations which sound very adverse for women. But a lot of women who are very worried, but you also have quite a lot of women probably been revisiting the way their lives work and the balance of their lives, and are thinking, I want to come back into the workforce. I want to partially come back into the workforce. I want to flex work, and I'm going to kind of find out a bit more about how I can do that better. So who would like to kind of come and give me a pitch for what they think they can bring to the post-pandemic world?
We've been really big on digital upskilling. I'm sure everybody knows the tech sector did the best during this period. It's sad to say it will be a K-shaped recovery, right? Where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And we've seen that. We've seen it in terms of the way contracts were handed out by the government. We've seen that in terms of tech companies having huge valuations and the most IPOs, seen in God knows how long. But tech is the future. And the thing is, there isn't that many women in tech. There isn't enough. And so for us, it's all about pushing not pushing it, but letting people know that you can get into tech, you can be a coder, you can be a project manager, data analyst, whatever it is. And now there's a lot of things online that helps you get there faster without having to get a degree. We're also pushing mentorship, so getting connected to people within the industries that can help you. We've seen so many great examples of people who completely transformed in 6 months, their careers, just because they've kind of looked at opportunities within tech. Again, I know it's frustrating. My background was in sports, and I remember when the government did that whole campaign about, don't be a ballet dancer, get into cyber or something like that. But it's not necessarily about that. It's just letting people know that there is options here, and they are still paying, and they are in dire need of more employees.
From my side, I'm seeing the sort of embers of the pandemic as an opportunity to really change the fabric of our working world. It's a system that was born in the Industrial Revolution when men brought home the bacon, women cooked the bacon, and that is no longer the current setup. So it's now time to, I think, the misconception around flexibility has been that this is some huge revolution, when actually all it is evolution in a digital world that's willing and ready. And I think we need to really shift mindsets from this is another thing that you have to do to HR departments to this is something that will enable your companies to flourish. We know one of the biggest reports of its kind by the Peterson Institute found that across 92 countries, 2,142 firms, if you have more than 30% of women at the top at C-suite level, you make more money. So I think we need to remove this almost from anything other than we're here to make more money for businesses, and this is how you can do it. And funnily enough, treating humans in a humane way is a good way to improve the bottom line. But just on a final point from my side is we're going to be working with the Law Commission to try and untangle the current laws around flexibility. So currently, you obviously have to earn flexibility after 26 weeks in a role. It's seen as a bonus ball or a nice to have, when actually it's a fundamental shift. So we need to change that by flex by default, flex for everyone from day one. We need flexibility to be on all advertisements, all job advertisements. We need there to be an understanding that this isn't for mummies who want to see more of their Weetabix smattered children, which is what I usually get hammered for. It's for everyone, it's for those living with disabilities. It's for anybody who, I was going to say a very rude word there, but it's for anyone who cares about diversity and inclusion on a real level. I think that's what we're going to be fighting for going forward.
Scilla, you've mentioned some of your frustrations with the government, possibly not surprisingly, but what do you think you have the best chance of changing? Shall we just say that after the events of the last few days, it doesn't look like you're actually, you're not like powering forward to an absolute majority at the next action with absolute confidence. So you've got to choose quite carefully, haven't you, what you decide that you really want to put your weight behind. And it has to appeal, and this bit I think is genuinely difficult, by the way. It has to appeal not only to people who've been nodding along with you, campaigning along with you, being trade unionists, been thinking about women's issues in the workplace. When you sit and sort of sort this out, where do you think you should go first?
Yeah. Anne, I've got a track record of working across the House on issues because I see failings across our political debate actually about how we understand the role of equality. As I agree very much with what Anna said. This is cold hard business logic. It hasn't always been seen as that, and I think that's one of the things that has to change. On a practical basis, there is a lot of concern across Parliament about the childcare sector, about the fact we haven't seen any investment in it. Right now, there is money that is owed to the childcare sector. So at the moment, the government will give you 20% off your childcare costs if you sign up for taxes. Lots of people don't. So there's about £1.6 billion sitting in the Treasury's coffers that we've already paid up, that's supposed to be there for childcare, and that could be used to subsidise the childcare sector. Because when you don't, what happens is, particularly in communities like Lyme, poorer communities like Walthamstow, where the nurseries close because you need more affluent residents to cross-subsidise them on the model. We all know that our model of childcare doesn't work. The funding comes in when the child is 3, by which point anybody who's going to be pushed out of the workforce probably already has left, and anybody wealthy enough doesn't need the subsidy. I didn't come into politics to sit around on the benches, Anne, and I recognise absolutely that you don't have to be in office to have parent, I hope you've seen some of the campaigns we've run about that. What I'd like to do is work with everyone on this call and then some to make the case that just as we talk about investing in roads as infrastructure, we should be investing in childcare as infrastructure, because it pays for itself. When you give families choices about how they can organise themselves, and they're meaningful choices and they're affordable choices, then they can work in ways that means they end up paying tax, and also they can be better parents. And I use the term parents pointedly because one of the things that really challenges me about this debate is it's seen as a women's issue.
Asma, I think you were trying to come in a bit earlier. Does what you want to say follow from Stella? If not, just
doesn't
shoot.
quite follow directly from the issue around childcare, although obviously we also work with a lot of single mums and they have enormous challenges in trying to progress themselves, develop themselves and come out of the pandemic while also often being single parents. So we understand the stresses that and I came from a single mother, but at a time when actually there was more support for single mothers. And as a result of the support and the childcare, she was able to put herself through university and all of her children as an immigrant from Pakistan. So obviously, if the support is there, you know, our lives are turned around and we invest in and contribute to the economy and society. I was actually just going back to, at the time, I think I was on mute, just to say that one of the things that we also do is obviously encourage our women to think outside of the box in terms of their career and potential. Just because they have come to us with a previous history of working in low skill jobs for very poor amounts of small amounts of money, we get them to think bigger about what they really want to do, and they end up working. Even within the context of the pandemic, our statistics are quite phenomenal in terms of where women start with us and where they end up. And we also cultivate fantastic relationships with the creative and digital sector, those growth sectors that seem to just continue to grow in spite of government knockbacks and the pandemic.
Something I wanted to touch on is what's the best way back and the best mix. We're talking about mixed mode working at the moment. Some companies are saying they're going to try to be more flexible than others. There's one example, I think it's PwC, who said no one would be required to be in the office more than 40% of the time. So in a sense, they've kind of set a bar there, but that if you set a very sort of firm figure or proportion, then you go back possibly to people think, well, if I'm not in that amount of time, my career will be held back. So who would like to jump in on what they think the right mix is? Obviously, it's a bit sector dependent, isn't it? Someone has to turn up at the right time to do a surgical operation. Can't have everybody on flexi time down at the A&E at the same time. So how do we balance that as we plan? I have a department, about 25 people to bring back. We've all got departments or in them or in working environments.
I think just to come to the point about, funnily enough, the NHS side of it, one of our main focuses going forward is going to be working with Flex NHS to find creative flexibility, to not see it as flexible working, to see it as creative working, talent-led working. And we know that Birmingham Women's Hospital are pioneering this in ward-led rostering, for example. So the simple shift there, to keep it quite short, is the nurses inform the matron of the shift that they've changed with somebody within their department, instead of the matron controlling the roster. So I think flexible working shouldn't be seen in this quite sort of binary, linear way, that it's 2 days in the office, 3 days out, for example, which is what a lot of the tech companies are doing. I think, you know, the utopia for me is that we ebb and flow between work and office in a way that works for both employee and employer. But I think we shouldn't be restrictive, obviously, to the sort of white collar realms, the 9 to 5 realms. I think this is possible for those who are working on the front line during the pandemic. And that's what we're going to be putting our efforts behind in the wake of Birmingham Women's Hospital making it work.
Just to jump in, I think a year ago, I feel like there was a unanimous decision that work from home is the future, it's forever. But now you're seeing a lot of people saying they're zoomed out and they can't do another Zoom meeting. I think I was just reading about Jamie Dimon saying everyone's going back into the office, he doesn't care. And so there are different approaches. I know us personally, our employees want a mixture. So that's what we'll do. And I do think you need to go, just survey your employees. What do the employees want? But it is interesting again, because we felt like, studies initially felt like it would benefit women, the work from home side of things, and, being able to kind of do any job and be at home. But actually what also happened was they were doing most of the housework as well. It wasn't that the husbands were in and then also helping. It was like, no, they're doing everything. So it was even more of a burden and a tax. I mean, one of our members, for example, had to move into her parents' house because the baby was too distracted for her husband. So these are the things that were happening. So I think that it does have to be a mix that works for everybody. And we still need to put, again, women's progression at the forefront. I think 76% of those working in kind of, social care and cleaning are women. And, these were the things that were affected most in this pandemic. They were frontline, they were catching the COVID, the virus. How do we ensure they're upskilled, or, we put them at the forefront when everyone's back into the office? Are they getting their vaccines as well? So there's so much to think about. And I think that it is a person by person, company by company decision. I know Spotify, for example, like people can work anywhere around the world, but a lot of companies haven't done that because of tax implications. But again, as the time goes on, I think people are quite zoomed out, and that hybrid model is definitely what most people will go for.
Who knew we'd be looking forward to water cooler chats and those awkward conversations by the kettle? And I think that's the misconception here, is that I like the 9 to 5 for me. I like boundaries. And I think we have a real concern here. The conversation is actually moving towards overproductivity and burnout, not are people doing too little. And I think one last example is Talk, are really discussing flexibility going forward as just talent-led working. Get the right people in place and then work out how they can work. But yeah, get me back to the water cooler, 100%.
Asma, I felt that you might like to come in on this. It's sort of concluding thoughts really as well. So yeah, where would you head with this? We're talking about flexible working, but if you want to emphasize something else that you'd like to take into the fingers crossed post-pandemic London world, what's going to be?
Just to go back to the point around flexible working, I think a lot of it is also just about trusting people to just get the job done. So I have no concern or consideration about any of my team in terms of when they log on and when they log off. I trust them. They've been trained. They're passionate about our cause, and they will deliver. So I think hopefully in terms of workplace culture, when it comes to hours and contracts, people are just going to have a more trusting approach that people are in that organization because they want to be there and they want to deliver. I think going forward, I think what has been really fantastic about this conversation is that we've also, with the diversity of the panel members, recognized that, yes, women have been disproportionately affected by COVID, but there are some women who are even more affected by COVID. And those are women from Black and Asian backgrounds with the intersectional oppression of also class and poverty as well. So I think that our reactions, our responses to how women are coping with the pandemic will obviously need to be nuanced and tailored to understand that not everyone experiences being a woman in the same way. And I think the work that you do and the work that I do definitely recognizes that. And so what we need to do with our women very much is to build their self-esteem and confidence, because they don't have it because of historical issues of discrimination and racism and so on and so forth.
Quick fire round, if we can allow to get it in. What's everyone's experience been like working flexibly? It's not going to be a deep dive. Stella?
I have also become a mum, and indeed I'm due to have my second baby in September. So trying to balance that and trying to work in different ways absolutely has been a challenge, whilst also serving a community that's been heavily hit by COVID with lots of the disparities. I just want to say, I think also we have to look at debt as a massive part of this. And Asma's absolutely right when she talks about intersectionality on this. 30% of mothers from Black and minority community backgrounds report being perpetually in debt now during the pandemic because they've been hit by low incomes anyway. Flexible working is brilliant, but you can't really work flexibly if you work in a local supermarket. Fundamentally, they will want people on the front line. So we have to also think about how we can relieve the financial pressure on families. I represent a part of London that has the 10th highest level of child poverty in the country because of housing costs. These challenges will get worse after the pandemic as work shifts, and that absolutely creates opportunities. But if you are already one of those groups that's been cut out beforehand, then those challenges get worse. And so for me, trying to find ways of working flexibly from home when I've been shielding because I've been pregnant has also been about trying to spend as much time connecting with people to get their sense of what's going on the ground and what they want to do next. This is a very, very open, up in the air conversation. My concern is that we've got to make sure that all those diversity of women's voices are heard in it in order to make sure what comes out of it works for everyone.
Stella and I have actually had chats behind the scenes. I was like, there was a point where we did the maths on it, and there was sort of like 8 hours of working day for some people, 3 hours of homeschooling, with sort of 12 hours of wraparound childcare. I don't think we can underestimate the sort of PTSD I think that a lot of people are going through at the moment from navigating that. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the thing I hope that anybody watching this goes away with is to raise a male voice in this conversation. There needs to be a man at the table. This is my biggest issue, is that I have to campaign with my husband consistently to be heard, but his voice is as important in this as mine is, because 1 in 4 flexible working requests goes through for women, 1 in 10 goes through for men. Men still find caring for their own children somehow emasculating within work. And my final point is, I heard from a guy heard from a guy last week who just said that his flexible working request was denied on the basis that his missus should do that. And he said, well, my missus is a brain surgeon, so you pick a lane. And I think the unconscious bias needs to be removed more moving forward from this pandemic.
Christy didn't offer to move over and do her job. Thank you very much indeed to my stellar panel, all of you. And I think one thing that we're not in any shortage of is really motivated, thoughtful and engaging women to take forward this debate. But as Anna said, don't leave the blokes on the sidelines. They need to be in this conversation too. So we hope that you all feed back to us and bring us your thoughts and ideas. And thank you so much for joining us, all of you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.